Hey, strong people, Kalle Beck here, bringing you another episode of the Strong Talk podcast. As you maybe can tell, my voice is a little hoarse still from yelling and screaming at 300 or so strong people over the weekend in Las Vegas at Strongman Corporation Amateur Nationals. What a fun weekend where it seems like everyone got sick because there's what 400 or 500 people just shoved into this little room. But anyways, it was fun. A lot of people came up and said that they listened to the podcast, and I want to thank you for coming up and saying that you listen and you enjoy it, and we'll keep bringing you these episodes. A lot of my clients did well, and most everyone hit PRs and had good days. Congrats to client Jessica Fithen, past guest on the podcast, on getting second place to win her heavyweight pro card. Probably have a nationals wrap up, just kind of talking about some of the events later on in a future episode with, as a lot of people went up to Mike Battolino, oh, you're the other guy on the Strong Talk podcast. So again, congrats. Hopefully everyone's healing up. If you didn't get sick, you're lucky. I think I'm going to skate by on that. Got a couple things coming up. United States Strongman just released their entry form, just went live for their nationals, which is going to be in New York, and we're going to have another group training program for that. A lot of people followed the one for Strongman Corporation Nationals, and they look great out there. So you can go to store.startingstrongman.com to pick that up. They announced a couple things that pro cards will only be given out at Strongman Corporation Nationals and the Arnold, no longer at Platinum Pluses, but Platinum Pluses will have, they'll be Arnold qualifiers. So if you win your class, whatever class it is, at a Plat Plus in Strongman Corporation, qualify for the Arnold Amateur World Championships. This episode is brought to you by Renaissance Periodization. Go to renaissanceperiodization.com. They have a new ebook out on understanding training volume. Let's see the actual name for it. How much should I train? It's 113 pages, including instruction on how to find your personal training volume landmarks, guidance on how to optimize your volume landmarks while dieting, including worksheet templates for volume landmark tracking. This will really help you with your training. Also, their diet templates are $30 off from now until Black Friday. They're marked down from $109 to $79. This is what I follow and what I recommend to my clients that need help with their diet to follow. It really helps you maintain or even gain some strength while dieting. If you are looking to go up a class or down a class, then there's diet templates for bulking as well. Going to get Nick Shaw, one of the founders of Renaissance Periodization, on the podcast soon. We have that scheduled up, and I think we'll delve a little bit deeper. But of course, again, thanks to our sponsor, Renaissance Periodization. Follow them at RP Strength and go to renaissanceperiodization.com for them to help you with your dieting and training. This week's guests are the producers and directors of the Born Strong film. It's a great documentary following Zydrunas Savickas, Eddie Hall, Brian Shaw, and Hafthor Bjornsson as they train and lead up to the 2016 Arnold Classic. If you haven't watched this yet, you just have to go do it. Don't even pay attention to what I'm saying or anything. You can rent it. It's just before you delve into this, go and watch the film if you haven't yet, or rewatch it. And if you have, you'll probably enjoy this interview because I talk to Gary and Ross about making the film, why they got interested in the sport of strongman from an outsider's perspective, what they learned about the sport, and some behind-the-scenes moments, stuff that they want to include in the film, and more. So without further ado, let's hear more about Born Strong Film. It's available on Amazon, iTunes, Vimeo on demand, pretty much anywhere you get on-demand movies. And if you look in the show notes in the description of this episode, there'll be links to purchase the film. Or you can go to amazon.com/shop/startingstrongman And anything you buy through there, we get a little bit of credit, and it helps us out. And, we appreciate it. And you can rent or buy Born Strong through that and get a couple cents on the dollar, and also do all your holiday shopping through there. And we got some Black Friday deals going on in our online store at store.startingstrongman.com. Grip shirts are marked down to $50 while supplies last. Limited quantities. Our deadlift socks are marked down to $10 from $20, and there'll be more coming up. So make sure to go to store.startingstrongman.com. Hey everybody, it's Kalle Beck here from the Strong Talk podcast. I have Gary Cohen and Ross Hockrow of the Born Strong film. If you've listened to this, you've probably already watched it, but just in case, there's a great documentary covering the four top strongmen in the world competing in the 2016, I believe it was, Arnold Classic. So first I want to thank Gary and Ross for coming on today.
Thanks, Kalle. Appreciate it. We're excited to talk about the film.
Okay. Yeah, and
happy to be here.
Yeah, and the first guy talking, that's Gary, and followed up by Ross, just for everyone just to be on the same page. So my first question is, I looked it up, and Gary, you've done some different, sports documentaries in the past. So first off, what's the obsession that makes you put all the time in to do sports documentaries at all? Like, where'd that start for you?
This is a labor of love for me. I grew up as a big sports fan, and ultimately really learned that, I was a storyteller, and that's what Ross and I have in common, is we both love sports, and we both, really enjoy telling stories. So for me, it's a way to work for a living and not feel like it's work. It's fun at its best. It's not always like that, but most of the time it really feels like, doing what you'd want to be doing anyway, and having a good time and making a living at it.
Yeah.
So that's how I got into this. And I've been doing it longer than Ross, because I'm a little older.
Longer than I've been alive.
I told Ross on a birthday during the shooting of Born Strong that now that you're 30, you're half the man that I am. Delighted me. I don't know if anybody else thinks it's funny, but I enjoyed that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that helps, keeps everything fresh. Ross is able to, having younger friends like that, contributing. And have you worked on most of these documentaries together, or when did you start to partner up with Gary Ross?
I think it was, 2014? I'm pretty sure it was. So
that sounds right.
Yeah, and it didn't even start out as sports. It wasn't until like a year or two later that we were doing some sports stuff. I mean, obviously, I know him because I was a big 30 for 30 fan before I knew him as the 30 for 30 guy. But that's not how it started. And so then we started doing the sports stuff. And I always say, if you can't be a professional athlete, this is the next best thing. So.
That's basically my motto after competing in strongman for a while, for a long time, and being blessed, I guess you could say, to be 5'7" and 185 pounds. I was never able to go pro, but I always enjoyed it. So now I just interview everyone involved with it and cover it. So yeah,
you do it longer.
Yeah, it beats working for a living, as I say. It's like you get to do what you love. It's good for you. That's great. Yeah,
absolutely. It's great. Yeah, I could go on and just list off my favorite 30 for 30 moments for the next hour or so, and we could really accomplish nothing. So I just want to acknowledge how great those are, and your involvement with and connect it with, so people know you're connected with them, and that just go.
Thanks. I mean, it's 30 for 30 has been, the gift that keeps on giving for me and a lot of other filmmakers. They've now made over 100 of them. We've made 10. And that's, I think, more than any other production company. And it's a great brand because they give a lot of resources, ESPN this is, to filmmakers without really reining you in ways that cramp your style. So once you convince them that they want to make a film about say Cleveland sports or the death of the Big East basketball conference, they ask a lot of questions, and then they write a check, and then they get out of your way, and you don't really deal with them until you've got something to show them towards the end of the process, and then they say, thumbs up, keep going, or a little bit to the left, or whatever it is. The notes are always feel like they're moving the project forward towards the ESPN audience. So it's a great gig to work with them. This project was never going to be right for them. So 30 for 30, people tend to think of 30 for 30 as a brand as being sort of everything related to sports documentaries. And it's not. It's a very specific brand about historical sports documentaries. So if, for example, somebody wanted to do a film about the battles in the 1980s for World's Strongest Man between Bill Kazmaier, Jeff Capes, and what's the name of the Icelandic guy?
John Paul.
John Paul, yeah. So if somebody wanted to tell that story, because that's historical and it's done and it tells, that could be a 30 for 30. The thing that we're doing, because it's current, because we didn't know the ending when we started to do it, is what I call a present tense film, and snobs often call them verite. And so that's not what they do. And so it wasn't going to be a 30 for 30. When we decided we wanted to tell this story, we knew that we were going to have to find a different way to get it out there. And so that was the journey we set out on. And very happy that it's now out in the world and people seem to like it. It's in the top 10 on iTunes. It was in the top 5 on Amazon the other day, and it's out there, and hopefully people are finding it and enjoying it. The reviews seem to be great.
Yeah, it was really well done. Before getting into it, I want to go back and just ask, being, you said a lifelong sports fan and everything, and documentary filmmaker, what was your first recollection of remembering about Strongman that it caught your eye?
That was me, I talked Ross into it. I read an article in the New Yorker by a very talented writer named Hendrik Hellsberg, I think is his last name.
Mm-hmm.
It was in 2013 about Brian Shaw.
Yeah, I remember that.
And yeah, it was a terrific piece. And the thing that really stuck with me is that there was just one sentence in there. He goes, when Brian, talks to his girlfriend who weighs 125 pounds, like all the strongmen's girlfriends. It was like, whoa, wait a second. These are 400-pound guys with 125-pound girlfriends. That intrigued me. That to me was like, whoa, that's interesting. I want to know about that. And so I reached out to Terry Todd, and Terry is the guy behind the Arnold Strongman Classic. Mm-hmm. He was the world's strongest man back in the 60s and early 70s, I believe. And before they had a competition with the title World's Strongest Man. And Terry, sort of explained to me, how it all worked. And over the course of many long conversations, we really, sort of thought that making the film would be a good idea. And I had just really started working with Ross in a way that made me think he was the perfect collaborator for a project like this, because I knew that there'd be a lot of travel to go meet these guys in their home countries, and Ross is a good traveling companion, and we had a good time together doing it. So didn't we? I think we did.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. Traveling all those places is, it's like the four corners of the world, as we were calling it when we were doing it.
Yeah, very different areas to go to, for sure. You're going to Lithuania, you're going to Iceland, England, and Colorado.
Yeah, and then of course the seasons, like you go to Iceland in the winter and the summer, and it's two different places. Same with Lithuania; it's just dramatically different.
I'd imagine. So when you started to kind of learn, was Terry Todd the first person you got into, because you ended up following the Arnold Classic, the two biggest strongman competitions in the world are World's Strongest Man, of course, and the Arnold Classic, and they've kind of started to get to this peak where there's the fans love to talk about which one's more important at the now. Where I feel
Right.
kind of did you look into trying to cover World's Strongest Man at all as a focal point for the documentary?
No, and from a storytelling standpoint, World's Strongest Man is far less interesting to me. World's Strongest Man, not to diminish the achievement or the level of the competition, but the process of World's Strongest Man it's shot like a TV show.
Yes.
It was in Botswana this year, and it's spread out over a couple of weeks, and they got the cameras and they got the guys, and not really much of a crowd and not much. The Arnold is an event. It's kind of an unusual event because it's in the middle of a convention center while there's a convention going on, for the strength and fitness industry. But it is absolutely an event, and it takes place over the course of 2 days, and whatever happens, and the audience is there, and there's no take twos, and there's no cameras, and there's no resetting for whatever for the next thing. There's just a competition, and that to me was much more satisfying. Not to mention that the Arnold has Arnold, and Arnold is a singular figure, and was really an important part in sort of making this viable for us.
Yeah, absolutely, and he crosses beyond every demographic and interest. Everyone knows Arnold, so I feel you have Arnold in your film, and he's prominent. He's very prominent in it. Then it just lends that much more credibility. He's so good on camera. You stick a microphone and a camera in his face, and it's going to be good. And
that's
people
for sure.
Yeah, and it makes it, and it's great that he's since they started the Arnold Classic, I believe 2002. I think it's lent a lot more exposure and credibility to the sport, just by him attaching his name to it. You could go. It's a toss up between how you define it. The best. One of the two best. Strongman contests in the world. The highest paying, if that matters to anyone.
Yeah. I think it does. I mean, I think the reality is, and
they're
one
athletes.
of the things that. Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I actually really, believe about the strongman is because Terry Todd is Terry and Jan are really the forces in making it happen. It's conducted in such a way as to be friendly for the competitors. Terry was that guy back in the day, so he knows how much rest you need, and what's a favorable kind of an event that works, and what doesn't work. And he wants it to be, the definitive strength competition in the world, and that's all he's looking for. He doesn't care about the TV ratings because it's not on TV. He's looking to create a great event that really serves the athletes, and so he does a lot of things to one of the things that they do at the Arnolds that you would never normally do in this kind of a thing is they have a medical testing process for all of the competitors at Ohio State University on the day after the Arnold competition is over, and they do that just because Terry's looking out for the guys, and and so they're getting all this intense medical information that you can't get except at an extraordinary research facility like at Ohio State. You can't get that in Lithuania or in Iceland or even in Colorado. So I do think the Arnolds are extraordinarily well run, and that comes from a combination of Arnold's patronage and leadership for the event, and Terry and Jan's work behind the scenes to create an athletic event with a lot of integrity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's also the other element of, like, if you're comparing it to World's Strongest Man, I mean, as Eddie would say, it's like, World's Strongest Man has the title as far as like the name, but they feel really different when you watch them as far as the amount of weight that's being lifted, where World's Strongest Man seems to be a little more based on reps, and the Arnold feels more like, all right, let's see who can lift the heaviest weight one time. When you watch the deadlift, for example, it's like their numbers are getting up there, or the, some like the Austrian oak. It's, the World's Strongest Man, when they have like, pulling planes and things like that, it's way more, like Gary said, it's a TV show type of thing. So they feel really different when you're there watching it.
Yeah, I get asked a lot from people, like they'll want to try to travel to World's Strongest Man, and I've been to it when it was back in California, and even just having to drive 6 hours to Southern California to watch it, I'm like, and being a big fan of it, I'm like, man, it's not set up for live viewing, so it's boring. I'm like, save your money, just go to the Arnold. I've been, I remember, the first time I went to the Arnold, and when I got to compete in the amateur side for the first time, it was a real honor. It's a cool event, and if you're gonna go for a spectator standpoint, it's the place to go for sure.
Yeah. I actually believe that there is another iteration of the sport that is even better, because and I love the Arnolds, and they treated us really, really well. But I do think that in a closed arena where the only thing going on is a strongman competition that is created for an audience, there is the potential for an extraordinary level of excitement. The Arnolds are competing with all of the other stuff on the convention center floor. It's not an enclosed arena, but some of the events that are put on in England, for example, by Colin Bryce, are they fill the Leeds Arena. There are 10,000 people, and they're there for one thing and one thing only. That creates a level of excitement, just like a boxing match or any other great sporting event. And the Arnold's is not quite that, and World's Strongest Man is certainly not that.
Yeah, no, that's the level where I feel, as a aspiring athlete, I want to compete. Talking to, one of my best friends is, a Giants. My best friend is an athlete at that level, and that's where he's like, where do you want to compete? I'm like, I want to compete where you have a crowd. That's the point. Being an athlete, you want to get paid to do your craft, and you want to be. It seemed like a professional where you're performing. Like that's the point. I feel.
Yeah.
When you went back, you decide you read this New Yorker article. You're like, this looks like an intriguing sport. Mm-hmm. You meet up with Terry Todd. That's the perfect person to connect with, because he's literally a historian on the sport. So you have any question about it, it's going to be probably more information than you need. So what's the process like when you actually decide, okay, we want to do a film on this and we want to cover the Arnold, like, and how did that start?
They needed to know I was serious. They needed to know that I was, professional and capable of creating a film that would reflect well on their event. They needed to know that, I was going to be trustworthy in terms of, both, showing up on time and staying out of the way, and ultimately creating a project that, reflects well on everybody. So there's a getting acquainted process, and all the while the clock was ticking, I reached out to Terry. We met for the first time in December of 2015, and we needed to be ready to shoot the first week of March 2016. So that's a lot to happen in basically a couple of months. And we made it all work. The other thing that had to happen before that is we had to meet all of our athletes, and there are 4, in their home environments, training for the event before the event. And because they're in 4 corners of the world, as Ross says, there was a fair amount of travel involved. And so there was a lot that had to happen quickly, and we made it all work, in large part because Terry wanted it to on behalf of the Arnolds. So he signed on and said, yes, let's go. And I said, yes, let's go. And Ross and I got on a plane, and we went to Iceland, and we went to England, and we went to Lithuania, and we went to Colorado. And we spent a couple days each with each of the guys. And then we shot the competition in Columbus with a bunch of cameras. We had 5 or 6 cameras there. And then we went back over the next 6 months and reconnected with each of the guys again in their home countries. So that was the process of how it all happened.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would imagine with that short time frame that a lot of the interview questions would have had to be done after the contest, because I can't imagine getting that much footage in, you have like 2 months basically before the contest. That's a logistical nightmare, but probably a whirlwind. Fun. Is it fun keeping it real quick like that?
Ross, was it fun?
I mean, surprisingly, I would say a good 70% of what you see did happen before, maybe even more, if I'm not mistaken. I had to go back and check, but yeah, I mean, I like being under the pressure of time, because I think that's when you do your best work. I know that seems contrary to what most people think, but it's, you can't mess up. You have to get it right. So, and you kind of get no rhythm. So I think it's better to do it kind of boom, 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 as opposed to just like, okay, we'll go to England and then we'll come home and then we'll go to Lithuania a couple weeks later. We did England, Lithuania, Iceland, all kind of just together. And, watching the 4 strongest guys on earth do their specific training regimens for what is considered, I guess, the purest test of strength, that's pretty cool. So you kind of get caught up in that and capturing that. So yeah, that's fun. And then, going back is also fun, because I won't lie, going to Lithuania and Iceland in the winter is a little bit like torture. And then when you go back in the summer, it's like, whoa, these are great places to visit, but not in the winter. It's too cold.
Yeah, one thing I would say is, for anybody listening, that, if you're a fan of the strength sports, we had about the greatest ride ever. It was a little bit wasted on us because we're not exactly, kind of obsessed with this sport. But we, were up close and personal with training sessions with, the 4 greatest strongmen in the world. And they each have a very different way of doing it. Eddie works out in a regular gym. He's got a regular workout partner. And, he's alongside, regular old folks from, 15 to 50. And there he is lifting, more weight than anybody in the world. Zydrunas works out entirely alone under a stadium in a thing that looks like a Gothic horror chamber. And it was just him and us, and that was crazy cool. Hafthor has cool. That was amazing. There was a quality to being with Zydrunas when he worked out that was like, kind of being with one of the gods on Olympus.
Yeah, I mean, the equivalent that I have is like, it would be like watching Michael Jordan, go play, like shoot hoops by himself at a park somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
To get ready for the season. It's just like the greatest ever, doing the thing that made him the greatest ever. And that was like, you had to think about that, or like, okay, this is, well, of course he's not as famous as Michael Jordan. I mean, Lithuania is, but we're watching the greatest ever do this, and a very weird sort of like not at a gym, because everybody else had, it's almost like doesn't feel as high end because Brian's got the home gym that he clearly, has designed and thought about and obsesses over. He tells stories about how he sits up till 2 a.m. just picking out the next greatest workout thing that could help him like elevate this and that. And Hafthor's got the, what we were calling the dungeon for a little while, and it's Magnus for Magnuson, I think, is his gym.
Yeah, Jackable.
Yeah. And, behind the convenience store, and then it's, and then like Gary said, Eddie just kind of works out in like a normal gym, like a Gold's Gym, what you would think in the United States. Mm-hmm. And we're going out of this stadium where the first ever strongman event in Lithuania was. That was crazy.
Yeah, Zadrunas, his segment, like when, like the, Eddie's segment in the film was great. Eddie's just so charismatic on camera. It's basically like watching the documentary that was done on him because it's him. It's just more
Mm-hmm.
of that, which I don't think
Yep.
any fans, they can't get enough of it, so it's good. But Zadrunas has always had this mythical air to him. He wasn't really on social
Mm-hmm.
media until like a year, maybe two ago. So like there's all this,
Mm-hmm.
talk about him. Like there's even an exercise that was named after him who I got to interview him and he's like, I've never done that. Like it was just like some, mystique. And I have videos on YouTube showing how to do the Zadrunas press with, thousands and thousands of views, and it's not even his, but that's how that's how because he's all the way over there. And he's been
Right.
doing it so much longer than everyone, and the careers are
Mm-hmm.
generally short in this sport. That's how
Mm-hmm.
10-ish years ago everything was. It was just like the first time I ever competed in strongman, I just showed up in the Santa Cruz Mountains in like a redwood forest, and like the guy opened up this locker, like this storage thing, and like had some rusty stuff in it, and we just started lifting things. It wasn't
Yeah.
in gyms. Now it's a lot more
Yeah.
available, but Zadrunas still has that old school kind of look, and it was just such a cool scene.
Yeah, no, it was really thrilling, just because of that, and also, it was. I mean, obviously, the Iron Curtain is down now. The
Mm-hmm.
wall is, but it's another side of the world, and his regimen evolved over time in a country that has a very long strength tradition. And Iceland also has, a similar, kind of a tradition, that descends back to the Vikings. And but Hafthor's workout regimen is with a close group of workout buddies in Magnus Vermagnusson's gym. Although I'm guessing that that's changed because now Hafthor has opened his own gym
now.
Yeah. So we haven't been back since, but so they all have different regimens, and it was great getting to know them and see them, and what's amazing to me about the sport is that it's timeless, in many ways. If you think about it, and it's about as pure a sport as there could be. It's the fastest and the strongest. Those are the two kind of purest kind of things. And yet these guys are unbelievably accomplished and not nearly as well known as, athletes in other sports, and every bit as accomplished in what they do.
Yeah, and no less effort, if not more.
Right, of course. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, exactly.
The food thing is
It's amazing to watch, and the food thing is amazing. Yeah, food thing
the things we saw with the eating was like, the first night in Iceland. I think Iceland was the first place we went. I was determined that I don't know why, but I had this idea. I guess this is the difference between being 30 and 60 years old. That I was going to keep up with Hafthor eating. That was a terrible idea. And that was probably, because that was the coolest night, I think, as far as like meeting the guys, just because I was like, okay, we're going to go in here. We're going to meet the guy who plays the Mountain, which Game of Thrones is almost everybody's favorite show. So that's cool. Iceland is this place that you hear about, but never really see. 300,000 people, they have their own language, which kind of makes no sense. And, as far as like that amount of people having their own language, but everyone speaks English. And, the thing that always sticks out in my mind, we didn't have a camera for it, and I regret it, but I was trying to keep up with Hafthor and gave up pretty quickly as far as eating is concerned. And he was just telling us a story. We're sitting at this table, and, he's kind of being a little animated with his hands, and he put his arm down on the table and broke the table in half. Me and Gary look at each other and we're like, he wasn't mad. He was just like telling a story and just kind of being animated, and then rested his arm down on the table, and the whole table snapped in half. And we thought it was the funniest thing ever, because it's like, here it is, the strongest guy in the world, like, can't even put his arm down on a table. He was like really embarrassed about it. He was like, didn't like want people to know that happened. So I thought that, going in, Gary had this obsession with the idea that like the size of them makes them it's almost like a pretty girl walking into a room. Like everybody kind of looks, and so there's no place to hide. And Hathor being the biggest of the four, if I'm not mistaken, as far as height and weight, and being on top of that being the mountain. There's not a place on Earth he can go where people aren't looking at him, even if they don't know who he is. And then, of course, then he just breaks a table in half casually just because his arm is that big.
Just keeps filling the stereotype. I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize about the sport for sure, is that people don't even need to know what these people do. It's literally the biggest person they've ever seen. So like my best friend's Robert Oberst, World's Strongest Man competitor. He competed at the Arnold before. And like he was with my family, my in-laws, at the lake, and we're like all docked. We're just hanging out at the lake, just being people. And we're all docked a couple boats in a row. And like some guy like 3 boats over asks my father-in-law, like, hey, can I take a picture with your friend? Do you think he'd mind? And my wife's like, my wife knows him, obviously. He's just Obi, and she goes, why would does he follow strongman? I'm like, that guy doesn't know anything about strongman or anything. And I'm like, it's literally the biggest person he's ever seen. Like that's all it is.
Yeah.
It's just like, I want to show people that like, you will never believe how big this person was. But
one of the things
that was the thing that Arnold said that like really kind of like made me go, oh, I think it's in the movie in Brian's section where he's talking about how like athletes, soccer players, basketball players, like if you want to see what they can do, you want to see them in their element, you have to watch them play. They have to pick up the ball and do something fancy with it, so you can go, oh wow, cool. But with a strongman, all you got to do is stand in front of them, and you get it immediately. That it's like, shake their hand or anything, and it's just you can feel it right there. It's like, this guy is, huge and strong.
It's like they're a different species sometimes.
Yeah.
I think I heard Joe Rogan describing one time. He's like, if you put like me, like if aliens came down later and they saw me, like buried next to Brock Lesnar, and they dug him up, they'd be like, oh, how did these two species live together? Just looking at their skeletal size. That's the thing I think about all the time. Being a very average sized person in this sport, and you're like, giants are real. So when you pick the 4 athletes, was there any other people that you considered following around before it? Or?
Yeah, actually, yeah. I mean, so when you make a film like this, sure, you want the best because, you're following these guys and, you hope it comes down to the end and your guys are, fighting to win it out. You don't want somebody who you're not following to be in contention.
Sure.
And so, it was pretty clear that, the winner of the event would be one of these 4 guys. The only outsider that had a chance, really, other than these 4, was Vitalis Lawless, who did win the Arnolds in 2013, and who ended up finishing 3rd. I don't think that's a spoiler for anybody that hasn't seen our film, because it's not a prominent part of the story. He did finish 3rd the year that we made it. But I think the consensus was that if our 4 guys were healthy, one of them was going to win. And the other thing about Vito is that he is also Lithuanian, and part of the plan in telling the story was to sort of capture the different perspectives on strength and come at the story from all the different angles, in terms of culture and geography. So having Zydrunas, we already had a Lithuanian. I didn't really want to follow a second Lithuanian. So Vitalis lost out and didn't get covered in the film, which I feel sort of bad about, but sometimes that's just the way it works. And I actually felt like we arrived at the Arnolds at an extraordinary moment in time. Sometimes you just get lucky, and we had decided to do this film, and it was the first time there were ever 4 competitors competing at over 400 pounds. And that's not just an arbitrary number. I mean, to compete in this sport at this level, I am convinced, after talking to people who know a lot more than I do, that, size is a big part of what makes you capable of moving huge amounts of weight. And so if you're trying to compete at a lesser weight, so Mateusz Kielkowski, I think I said that properly, is an amazing athlete, but he's 100 pounds lighter than these guys.
Yeah.
And to try and compete in the same sport with that much of, sort of a handicap, if you will, is can he compete over a long period of time? Well, he's a young guy, maybe. Or maybe he'll fill out and add weight. I don't know. But, he's an extraordinary athlete. But I don't think you can expect him to lift the same amount of weight as Hafthor or Eddie when they're carrying 100 pounds more than him.
Yeah, when you saw him compete, some of the events where, it's clear that only the four guys we picked could even do it. Again, there's 5 events, and there are certain weights where it's just no one else in the competition even has a chance of lifting it. Sometimes you watched him do it and you go, oh, he's so close. He's right there, but he's missing 100 pounds of leverage or whatever the scientific term of that would be. I guess it's different for each
just
lift,
mass.
but yeah, with the Mark Henry would say, or I think it was Mark Henry and David Epstein both were saying you need weight to move weight. So, you got to have it.
To be the strongest man in the world, you cannot have abs. You need to have a belly.
Yeah, Mark was great. He had some great lines in the film for sure. Mariusz Pudzianowski would disagree, but he also never did good at the Arnold.
Yeah, I think the Arnold's exactly. I mean, I think World's Strongest Man. There's a lot more movement-oriented competitions and reps and so on and so forth. At the Arnold, it does skew towards the bigger guys and so on. So, one of the things that again, I think our cast was, we were lucky. We got all 4 guys were healthy for the competition. They all weighed 400 pounds. They're all extraordinarily capable. They've all either won World's Strongest Man or the Arnold's, or they've been, within just an eyelash of it. Hafthor and Eddie are both still in their 20s. So you would have to guess they have not yet peaked.
Which we came to find out was a disadvantage.
Right, exactly. Yeah, Brian is in his mid-30s, so he probably is roughly at his physical peak for this sport. Although who's to say, he might continue to get even stronger over time. And Zydrunas is the old master. He was 40 at the time we shot the Arnolds. I guess he's probably 42 now, 41 or 2, and so, we did capture sort of different generations, as Brian, referenced in our conversation, and these are Hall of Famers in the strength sport, I believe. I mean, Eddie and Hafthor, probably still have a ways to go to kind of, reach that level of stature. But, extraordinary guys. And really interesting. And the other thing that's fascinating to me, as somebody who spends most of my life working in, amongst people in the American team sports, football players or basketball players, is these guys don't have a league. There's no commissioner, there's no owner of their team. So each one of them has to manage their own career and their own life.
Yeah.
And find a way to make a living, find a way to set up a training regimen, find a place to do it, create their own sponsorship relationships, manage their own schedule, manage their own eating regimens. It's an extraordinary process to observe. And it's singular. It's like, there just aren't many people in the world whose professional success depends upon eating 8 meals a day. It's like, what? It's crazy.
Yeah.
And yet it's very true for them.
Yeah, the operating costs are high just to be able to do it.
That's right.
It is an interesting sport in that way, and it's I interview a lot of people that had either just turned pro or something, and then that's the question I get a lot privately is like, hey, so now where do I go compete? Like I'm lifting those weights those guys are. How do I actually get into the big show? And it's It's a part of the sport. Being your own promoter.
Well, you know what? There's a happy answer to that now. I believe that the Arnold satellite events, all of the different Arnold competitions, and there were 9 last year, really offer an opportunity for somebody who's competing at a high level and eager to get in the game, to whether it's the South America or the Africa or Asia, if you can dance with the big boys, there are now these lesser events that you can compete in, and there's prize money, and there's a high standard of competition, and it all leads to the Arnolds. They're all part of the qualifying regimen for who gets to go to Columbus every March and compete for the big prize, which is over $70,000.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it has gotten a lot better in that regards. With there's more clear paths. But even just like what you said, not even some of the strongest guys in the world just aren't really aware of that, and it's unfortunate. But you try to do what you can to make it more known and aware. Going like you go to all these different places. What were some of the things that like you had like a perception of how these people would be, and what was like the biggest difference that in the reality of how it actually was once you actually went there and met them?
Ross, you have an answer for that one?
Well, I guess I would say, I didn't know what Lithuania was going to be like. Obviously, you think about Soviet Union and things like that, and the thing that really blew my mind when we were there, I think it was the second time, you see a country that is sort of like, and this is less about Zadrunas and more about the country itself, sort of like in new freedom, if that makes sense. You see them sort of experimenting with the idea of being a free country. It's like you drive from the airport and you see the Soviet buildings, and you kind of feel like almost like a little depressed, where it's like, oh, I kind of get what it would be like to be here for a second, but then boom, then there's like an orange building sort of leading to the right, only because we can do that. And there's a lot of that in Lithuania, where it's sort of like the tale of two cities in a way, like kind of one stuck in the past and one sort of trying to embrace the future. And then the other thing is, you think the stereotype, big guy, strong guy, probably not that nice. And I gotta say, they were all really nice, but Hafthor is one of the nicest guys I've ever met in my life. And, he really embraced the idea. Like, I don't know if it's part of the culture of Iceland or if it's just how he is, but, his father, like, went down to the place we were staying to make sure it would be adequate enough for us to stay there, and, like, arranged the whole thing, and then invited us to his 4-generation Sunday family dinner, where it's, parents, grandparents, kids, and grandkids all there, and it's like 17, 18 people. And we thought we were at some like fancy Christmas dinner, but this is just the thing that they do on the weekend. And, his dad's a chef and made this like feast that I can taste in my mouth as I'm describing it now. And it's just, and it was just something about the like family dynamic of Iceland that was not like, you don't get that in the United States at all. I mean, some people might, but I definitely don't. And it was kind of wild to be a part of it. And yeah,
that's really cool. So when you were trying to keep up with Ross, when you were trying to keep up with Hafthor eating, what at what percentage was it that you realized this was a bad idea?
I can eat a lot, surprisingly.
Sure.
Not compared to them. I was probably like 5 appetizers in, where I was like, I wasn't full yet, but I knew I was like hitting my wall pretty quickly, and that everything beyond that was going to be a horrible idea. And not to mention, it's not like I'm in England where it feels, like the food is a little different, but not so different. In Lithuania and Iceland, these are completely different cultures, so the food is completely different. And it's not steak, it's lamb, it's not salmon, it's Arctic char, it's just things I never even heard of some of the things that I was having. And so that was it's just, yeah, I don't know why it was a bad idea. And there was kind of on that note, as far as the food culture, you know, I remember a moment we were at this waterfall. I mean, you might remember the shot of, it's in the trailer, of Half-Thor standing on that waterfall, which there's like 500 people behind him, by the way, even though he's on that little cliff by himself. And I remember we were leaving there, and he's really obsessed with ice cream, and I like ice cream, and Iceland has amazing ice cream, not surprising. And he bought this stuff. It's beef jerky, but it's fish. And so it's fish jerky, and it's as gross as it sounds, I mean, to me. And Half-Thor is kind of very similar to my brother, where like he offers you something to try, you need to try it. He will not accept that you didn't try it. So I'll never forget, you know, he's the nicest guy, and he's just like, here, try this. And I'm like, no, I'm good. And he just looks at me and goes, try it. And I just got this moment where I was like, all right, like, don't kill me. Even though he never would, but it was just funny. He just got that sort of, that's part of the culture where everybody kind of tries everything and shares everything, and the food's a little bit different. And, you know, moral of the story is fish jerky tastes like paper. Not good.
I think they call it dried codfish, but yeah.
It sounds really appetizing. What was some moments that you really wish you could have included? And you know, on that note, are you going to put out some bonus content in the future?
You know, I hadn't really thought about it, but you know, the one piece of bonus content that I feel like we should do, Ross, I mean, we haven't really talked about this, is Zydrunas' workout, you know, as a separate thing, you know, kind of under the stadium there. It's just because he is who he is. And there's more to it, and we really did capture it. And so that feels like, I sort of feel like we owe that to the community to make that available and post it. And you know, that's one thing that we have that we didn't show. That, you know, there were all kinds of moments that happened. You know, when you do these things, not everything happens on camera. And so, you know, the moment with Half-Thor at the restaurant with the table, you know, we don't have that to share, I'm sorry to say. Those are things that come to mind. I think, you know, the sport, if you're a fan of the sport, this is a magical time, I believe. I really believe that the arrival of all four of these guys at the highest level of the sports at this moment is kind of unprecedented. And I talked to Terry Todd about this, and, you know, and part of it is the evolution of the sport and the evolution of sports in general, that, you know, they always get better. And athletes, you know, it's like once there's Michael Jordan, it's like, okay, I know that's what excellence looks like. I can model that. And then along comes LeBron, and, you know, you can argue about the greatest of all time, but LeBron had the advantage of being able to look at Michael Jordan and model him. Mm-hmm. And Michael Jordan didn't have that advantage in the other direction. So in strongman right now, I believe, and again, I'm not an expert on the sport except for the last 2 years, you know, I've really been living amongst the best. I think it's a magical moment. And I think, you know, Half-Thor and Eddie have each had the advantage of being able to look at Zydrunas and Brian and say, okay, this is how it's done at the highest level. And Eddie is very open about, you know, modeling his training and his discipline after Brian's. And, you know,
he
and
had
the
Brian's picture in his car.
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, and the weights keep going up and the training keeps improving, and these guys learn more about nutrition and recovery and, you know, and there are new techniques. I mean, we have a shot in the film of, you know, of Eddie and Brian went to a cryotherapy, you know, session. Apparently it speeds up recovery after workouts and stuff. So, you know, those things didn't exist, you know, just a few years ago. So, you know, I do think we've arrived at a golden age for this sport, even if it's not exactly, you know, on you know, the top of, you know, everybody's mind. It is still a niche sport. I think that'll change. I think the sport is really compelling. I think social media is perfect for this sport as a way for these guys to sort of share their own achievements and, you know, create their own followings. And I think, you know, inevitably there's a groundswell of support that grows out from that. So I think over time, if you're a fan of this sport, you're going to see it evolve, and you're going to see more competitions and more great competitors and more amazing world record performances. I think that's inevitable. But I do think that this is, a magical time for this sport, and it's the arrival of all of them at the same place at one time that's really exciting for me.
No, yeah, it's
there's two.
Yeah, go ahead, Ross.
Two scenes. Yeah, there's two scenes that didn't make the film that were in the film. I'm gonna say probably right up until the very end, and you just sometimes things don't make it, and it's not any reason. It's not any indictment on the scene as much as it is like sometimes you just got to cut stuff out for the sake of time. And there were two scenes with Brian that I really liked, and one of them was we went to his old high school, and when you get into the story, you realize that he's from this very small town, and so he's like this hero at his high school. And he was I guess mentoring kids there or something, but there was a scene where they're just like playing basketball, and Brian was a college basketball player, and he takes this jump shot, and you kind of look at it and you go, huh, I get it. Like, he looks awkward now because he's 430 pounds, and it just somebody that like large, not just tall, but large, plus he's 6'8", it doesn't look very smooth taking a jump shot, but you see in there where it's
a little more.
You see it in there where it's like
Brian's a player.
Yeah, no, they're all there. So
player.
is Hafthor and Eddie. Yeah, and you watch Eddie swim, and you kind of get like they didn't just pick up strongman because they picked up strongman. Like, these guys are really good athletes, and they were all good at something before this, like at some sort of level, not professional level, but with the exception of Zadrunas, who got into strongman when he was 16, these guys were all pretty good at some other sport. You kind of see, Eddie was like would have been an Olympic swimmer if he stuck with it. And that's just, it's kind of mind blowing to think about, especially like Eddie as a swimmer or Brian as a basketball player. Or if you look at Hafthor as a basketball player, this really scrawny 6'9" guy, and you go, wait, that guy became that guy. And that's just, how does that work? And that's the one thing you realize is they're really exceptional athletes. And then there's the other one with Brian that I really liked, and it was watching him do his recovery. And he's the one that really takes this part serious. He goes to this clinic in Colorado and does all these crazy like recovery. Just I honestly don't even know what the things that he does are, because they're just these machines I've never seen before, where it looks like there's this one machine that he works on his forearms with that almost looks like something that would like buff out your car, if that makes sense. Like this wheel that spins, and it's like crazy vibration, and then gets these crazy stretches, and and it's just, that would be like, I think that would be cool to see how, it would only kind of work if you had all four of them, and we didn't have all four of them. I might have been really convinced that they all do it, but Brian definitely does it and takes it super serious. And that was a scene that I really liked, but we just couldn't put it in.
Yeah, no, it was really cool. I think one of the biggest turns in the sport lately is people being aware that, after they're great amateur athletes, and how as a sports fan how competitive and how much of like a genetic freak you have to be to have a professional career in some of the major sports like basketball. People that weren't are just freaks of nature themselves, as you can see by Hafthor and Brian. And I always look and I'll interview someone, and they're like, they've been doing strongman for like 6 months and they've already went pro, and you're like, I didn't even know who this guy was a month like a month ago. And he just went into this contest, even though there's been people doing it for half a decade, that you're like, oh, that for sure, that guy's going to win. And it turns out, and he's like, oh yeah, I was a, Division I football player. That's the difference, is good athletes seeing this as like a falling back point to continue their sports career.
Yeah.
Which is really pushing it forward. Because at the end of the day, I always say, good athletes are good athletes. They can pick things up quicker and apply those, and all they have to do is apply the innate ability and that drive to compete into a different skill, and it's transferable a lot of the time.
Well, the training, it's like if you're an elite athlete on any level, you have to train more than like just a regular old athlete, and then you come over to something like strongman, which requires that and more. Then you kind of have that. You've trained, for lack of a better term, you've trained that muscle in your head of motivation, where you're like, okay, I have to go train today. I have to go train today. I have to go train today. And you learn how to get stronger, and you learn how to, work different muscles and things like that, but just starting off and doing it. Like if I was like, I'm going to be a strongman tomorrow, like, good luck. It's just not going to happen.
I talk to a lot of people that have that, and they can be the strongest person of themselves, but it's a tough road. If you want to get to, and it happens. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's a lot tougher road. I look at someone, and they're like, I just got done. I 3 years ago I played Division I football. I'm like, yeah, we can probably get there pretty quick, but if you've been sedentary and working an office job for the past 10 decade or so, it's a longer road. You can definitely get stronger, and that's why I say strongman's for everyone. I'm about to fly out to amateur nationals pretty much right after this interview, and everyone there with a hope and a dream, and some will get it this weekend, and some will keep striving, which it's fun to go to the sport at that level. But I say it's for everyone, because everyone can pick up some sort of implement to try to improve themselves, and do things that they didn't think capable of before. And that's and I think something that the average hobbyist strongman or just a person should take away from this film is you look and these guys, the 4 best in the world, go out and they're about to do weights that they don't know. They might they're convincing themselves in their head that they can, but it's not a sure thing. It's not the same as like playing basketball and you shoot threes and you hit threes. You're pushing the limits of the human body and and the potential, and just doing things that would 2, 3, 5 years ago people would say was never going to happen.
Yeah.
And they make it
keep moving
happen.
the goalpost. It's like yeah.
Awesome. Before we wrap up, I just want to talk about further distribution of the film. Is there any news? Like, I get all the questions just by sharing it on, the Starting Strongman social media of, are you guys is it going to be available on DVD? Is it going to be on Netflix, etc.?
It will be available on DVD. Beyond that, I can't really say at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We're really happy. It just dropped on iTunes.
Sure.
and all the what are called the SVOD platforms. And unless you work in my world, I can't imagine that means anything to you. But you can get it now through anywhere you rent movies, and it's out and about, and it's getting great response, and it's really promoting the sport in a way that makes me really happy. And so it'll be around forever. The fantasy is that it becomes the pumping iron of strongman. That would be, an amazing thing, that it becomes this enduring kind of thing that, raises the profile of the whole sport the way pumping iron did for bodybuilding. But it's out and about, and, and it's called Born Strong. And, I guess what I would want to say to anybody who's listening is these 4 guys are really admirable. The work that they do to make themselves better athletes is I've never seen the like of it, because they don't have the support systems that athletes in other sports have. Even if you're a track athlete or if you're a tennis player or whatever, you have a system in place. There's a structure, there's a tournament, or a tournament schedule, or you're part of a team. These guys are entirely isolated, and yet they go out and they do it every day, and they work their asses off, and it's an obsession. It is around the clock. And the level at which they, push the boundaries of what is possible is remarkable to observe. And my hope is that our film captures that, and that, people who are interested in this sport will be satisfied in seeing it. And, the early response has been great.
Yeah, no, I've heard some great things, and I want to thank you as I'll consider myself a spokesperson on the strongman community at this moment, and just give a thanks and for doing the film and putting the time in to make it, and spotlight the sport that I love and has become basically my it is my life, covering it. And it's great because we've always talked like you just need to showcase in a way that people can understand what we already know as amateurs or enthusiasts of the sport. And I really think that Born Strong did that. I couldn't see it being much any better, really.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. And, hopefully the community thinks so too, because, while the community isn't that big, the passion that strongman fans have translates to, a much larger audience. So hopefully people find it and feel like it's, it tells a story worth hearing.
Absolutely. Thanks so much again for taking the time out of your day, to promote Born Strong Film. It's available, it's on Amazon, iTunes, Vimeo, pretty much anywhere you can rent movies digitally. There'll be a DVD release. I'll put links in the show notes so you can go and just click away and watch it, and share it with your friends. I think if you enjoy watching documentaries and things unfolding, like you said, you did get pretty lucky where the 2016 Arnold, I was at it live, and it was no one ran away with it, which makes great television.
Yeah.
That's what I said in my review. I'm like, I wish I was just watching this as one of those random documentaries I end up watching, because it would have been that much more compelling not knowing. But it's still, even then, it made me realize, I'm like, crap, even though I was stage side, as media for the event, it was still I got to relive it. And I was like, crap, that was a really good contest I was at. I almost, and didn't think about it. So yeah, thanks again.
Well, thank you for that. Thanks. Appreciate it a lot, Kel.
Thanks. So this has been the Strong Talk podcast, talking Born Strong Film. Go out and rent it, buy it, because you're going to want to watch it again. You don't want to rent it. And we'll talk to you all next week.